Hi everyone, this is my Suzuki Inazuma 750 cafe racer, and I built it up from the standard bike which I bought a few years ago. I'll show you all the way around and I'll talk about the mods a little bit later. And I'll be able to tell you how I built it, because I also have a standard Inazuma 750, and this is what my cafe racer looked like when I bought it, and I'll be able to show you what I modified on this bike to turn it into the cafe. As you can see, they're very different. So the problems, not the problems, but the modifications on this bike that I had to make were, starting at the front, I had to cut off the standard yokes for the bars. I modified these brackets that hold the headlight. I had to take this part down to here to allow me to fit clip-ons onto here. I put spacers in the forks because a lot of the weight transfers to the front when you fit clip-ons, and I needed to stiffen the forks. I changed the indicators, I put on gaiters, and did some paintwork and things to the mudguard and wheels, and I'll show you that when we move to the cafe. The good thing about the Inazuma, or one of them, is it has a 4:1 pipe as standard, and that suits the cafe racer look. Here I did away with the standard airbox, and the only way I could get it out was to break it up. I put bigger mains in, and we'll talk about that later on. As you can see with the standard Inazuma seat, it slopes down here, and that doesn't suit the cafe racer look, where you want a straight line running from the bottom of the tank through. So I had to make brackets to raise these up at this end 30mm, I think, from memory. I had to remove the rear peg hangers, which causes problems because of the exhaust mounts to that. These are not standard shocks, and the standard shocks are a help, as I'll show you later. I cut the brackets off that hold these mounts, and a lot of the rear subframe was cut away as well. And also a problem you'll see on the Inazuma, if I sit down, is that the pegs, and on this side the rear brake, they're not concentric, they're not mounted on the same bracket. So you can't move one and also move the other. So I'll show you when we come to the cafe how I got round that to create rear sets. I took the centre stand off, and the job from hell was to grind away the centre stand brackets. When you raise this up here, that exposes the battery box. So the battery box now sits on its side with the ECU bolted on behind, and because the battery's on its side, it's now a lithium ion battery. Oh, the rear end is changed. centre stand again. Rear peg mounts again had to be taken away. Here we can see on this side how the gear lever and front pegs aren't mounted on the same shaft, and both have to be moved or changed independently. To get get it all work in, I had to grind this peg off the side stand on the cafe. You may be able to keep it depending if you modify yours differently if you decide to do one of these. I polished up the casings. I did my best with them myself when I gave them to a friend to do at work. And then there's a couple of cosmetic mods on the radiator, etc. And we'll show them when we move to the cafe. But they lend themselves well to being a cafe racer. I kept the standard clocks because I quite like them. They've got a bit of a retro look and they give a little bit wind protection. So now we'll move to the cafe racer and have a look at that. So here we are back at the cafe, and I'll try and talk you through the mods in the same order as we discussed them on the standard bike. Here you can see how the top yokes have had the mounts cut off, and this has been polished. These were taken off, of course, some spacers put inside. I think the spacers are about 15mm, maybe 1/2 inch to 5/8. I put a little plate on the brake master cylinder with an Inazuma on. You can see the clip-ons here, they're high-rise clip-ons just to make the bike a bit more comfortable. Single mirror mounted on the bar end, wrapped grips rather than standard. Non-standard indicators, and you may be able to see how the bracket has been shortened. I cut the original headlight bracket, moved the two ends closer together and drilled and bolted them through to get the shortened version I needed. So the clamps for the clip-ons with space to sit on the top of the stanchions. Here's the non-standard radiator cover. Suzuki gaiters on the forks, custom paint, wheels done in gold with polished rims, black centres on the discs. There's the standard headers, polished rocker cover, needs a polish, polished casings, pod filters, standard air filters gone. You can see in there the ECU mounted on the battery box. I had to wire these because it's easy to knock these off because they just pop despite the Jubilee clip. And to keep more or less standard jetting, these are lined about 2/3 inside with plastic and bathroom silicone, which is a bit Heath Robinson, but it cuts down the amount of air going in and keeps the tuning more or less standard. It's slow to warm up the bike, but once it's warm it runs perfectly well. Here you can see the line of the tank running right through the seat. That's hard to achieve, but by making a bracket, which you can see here, there's a standard mount, lifting it up about 30mm. That takes this up and keeps the line running through. Non-standard rear indicators. See here where the frame's been cut off, and there's a bracket runs up and over to the other frame side that keeps the stiffness in the rear end and stops you having to put a loop on the back, although that would maybe make a bit of an extra difference. If we'll look right through there. This here is the lock that keeps the seat on, and I've relocated it to here. I'll show you it from the other side, and that lets the seat assembly be removed, and inside there is a bit of storage, access to the battery, etc., and it's nice and convenient to do that. The standard shocks, a non-standard can made by, or welded together by Pipe Dynamics here in my county, clamped here, and I've made this bracket here. It mounts where the foot pegs mount. This is 3mm aluminium, very stiff. I cut this little hole out just as a feature, and then this clamp here, which is nice and broad and covers the weld between the pipe and the can, and that's all that supports the can, but it's very rigid. This can's not heavy. It was very loud though, so I've had to repack the whole can, and I extended the perforated tube all the way to the end and packed it from here where it stopped right to the very end to help a little bit with noise. Now, one of the biggest and most important mods was the pegs. I worked out that the pegs from a 650 Bandit would fit on, and they have the benefit of having the brake lever and the peg concentric, so when you move one you move the other. So I was able to move the whole thing up, bolt it through the original mount. This came with the master cylinder, which sits up here, and the whole thing wasn't too much trouble to fit, and it's kept the Suzuki kind of quality. These are Suzuki pegs from the 650 Bandit on the Suzuki bike, and I liked that. Moving to the other side, another Cafe Racer mod. You see the side mounted number plate. This is a bracket I made that clamps round the top of the remote reservoir for the shock. Carries the number plate and carries the rear light. I tried to put a custom kind of period rear light on, but because it was so close to the indicator, the two things just looked odd. So I've put this little smoked glass one on, which doesn't attract any attention, and it stops it, doesn't take away from the look the same. And that's a little bit loose. Here again we've got a little bracket to raise the side panel to match the seat. The 650 Bandit peg, this time of course with the brake lever and an extension, because obviously the whole peg and mount is going backwards and upwards. The ground off area here where there's a peg on the standard side stand, polished casing, pod filter, and all the way back to the front of the bike again. And that's probably more or less it. Quite a lot of work. Paintwork was done by Scott Hardy at SJH Bodyworks and Rizla Suzuki Colours. The decals I saw online and it had made at the sign company in my local town, and the upholstery was done by an old chap in Alloa. And I may change that and try and make it look a bit more period. I'll now take the rear seat off and we can have a look underneath. Now the seat has been removed, and you can see where I mounted the seat lock, just discreetly under the frame there, held on by those two screws that you can see there. It retains the standard little bucket here for the tools in the manual, This can just pop out. It's easy with one hand. And there is a lithium-ion battery on its side. A little panel here, just I was worried about water getting up to the battery, so I fitted an aluminium panel that comes up. This bracket here sits over the frame rails and supports the battery box. Here's the master cylinder for the back brake, nice and easy to access for topping up, etc. I kept as much of the rear mudguard as I could for weather protection. And all in all, it's quite tidy. Here is the underside of the custom seat. This here is part of the standard seat, bolted and screwed through to the seat pad, retaining these rubber mounts and the lock. So because the standard seat's been retained in part, that helps keep it all together and makes it kind of work. So that's the bike back together, nice and easy. You can ride the bike in all weathers. The high-rise clip-ons are fairly comfy. I've kept a lot of depth in the seat pad to make it comfortable, and it's a bike you can really do a bit of mileage on. It is noisy though. Now I'm going to take both bikes up to the house and get my daughter to hold the camera, and I'll do a drive past and let you see them both running and let you hear them both. So standard silencer on the standard bike and this custom silencer on the Cafe.